Welcome to the I Choose Today podcast. I'm so glad you're here. Over the past few weeks, we've been talking about perseverance. We talked about keeping walking. We talked about trusting in the waiting. And last week, we talked about standing when we feel weary. Today, I want to talk about something that often comes with perseverance, and that is slow progress. Because sometimes perseverance doesn't feel hard because of suffering. Sometimes perseverance feels hard because things are just slow. Slow growth. Slow answers. Slow change. And slow can be discouraging because we like progress. We like movement. We like seeing results. But sometimes God works slowly. And slow does not mean stagnant. Slow does not mean God isn't working. Slow often means God is building something deeper. Philippians reminds us that God is continuing the work He began in us. That means the growth is ongoing. Transformation is ongoing. And perseverance means continuing, even when growth feels slow. I think about seeds. When you plant a seed, you don't immediately see growth. There's a season where everything is happening beneath the surface. Roots are forming, strength is developing, but you can't see it yet. And I think perseverance often looks like that. God is working beneath the surface. God is building something deeper, even when we don't see it. I once heard about a species of bamboo, often called Chinese bamboo, that grows in a fascinating way. When it's planted, nothing appears to happen for years. You water it, you care for it, you nurture it, and yet nothing breaks the surface. For 5 years, there's no visible growth. It would be easy to assume nothing is happening, right? To assume the effort is wasted. To assume the seed didn't take. But during those 5 years, something is happening beneath the surface. You see, the roots are growing deep. The foundation is forming. The strength is developing underground. And then, after those years of unseen growth, something remarkable happens. The bamboo suddenly shoots up, growing rapidly in a very short period of time. What looks like sudden growth was actually years in the making. And I think perseverance often looks like that. God is working beneath the surface. He's building roots. He's strengthening our faith. He's forming something deeper, even when we don't see it. And sometimes we get discouraged because growth feels slow, because we don't see progress, because we don't see change. But slow growth is often deep growth. And deep growth produces lasting strength. Just like that bamboo, What looks slow at first becomes strong and established because of what's happening underground. And I think one of the hardest parts about slow growth is that we live in a culture that values speed. We want quick results, quick answers, quick transformation. But God often works slowly, and slow can feel discouraging because we don't always see progress. We don't always see change. We don't always see what God is doing. And when we don't see movement, we assume there's nothing is happening. But just because we don't see growth doesn't mean God isn't working. Just like that bamboo, something may be happening beneath the surface. God may be deepening your faith. He may be strengthening your character. He may be preparing you for what's ahead. And that kind of growth takes time. Because deep roots don't grow overnight, and neither does spiritual maturity. And when we look at Scripture, we see this pattern again and again. You see, Joseph didn't step into leadership overnight. There were years of preparation, years of waiting, years of growth. David wasn't crowned king immediately after being anointed. There were years of tending sheep, years of hardship, years of formation. And even Jesus spent years in quiet obscurity before stepping into public ministry. Slow growth is not unusual. It's often how God works. Because God is not just interested in where we're going. He's interested in who we're becoming. And perseverance means trusting God even when that growth feels slow. It means continuing to walk even when the progress isn't obvious. It means believing that God is working even beneath the surface. And slow growth is still growth. Sometimes we assume that transformation should happen quickly, but God often works gradually, step by step, layer by layer, moment by moment. And perseverance means trusting God even when the progress feels slow. There have been seasons in my life where growth felt slow, where change didn't happen overnight, where answers didn't come quickly. But looking back on that time, I can see how God was working, how He was shaping my heart, how He was strengthening my faith, how He was building something deeper. And I think sometimes we need to remember that slow growth is often deep growth. You see, God is not in a hurry because He's building something that's lasting. Even with this podcast, growth hasn't always been fast. There have been times where I wondered if what I was doing was even making a difference. But I've learned something. God is not always working in big, visible ways. Sometimes He's working quietly, one heart at a time. And that kind of growth may feel slow, but it's all so meaningful. Because God is building something deeper than numbers. He's building transformation. And perseverance means continuing, even when things feel slow. Hebrews talks about needing endurance so that after doing God's will, we will receive what He's promised. That implies something important. There's often a gap between obedience and fulfillment, and perseverance lives in that gap. It's continuing to trust, continuing to walk, continuing to believe, even when things are slow. So if you find yourself in a slow season right now, I want to encourage you. Don't give up. Don't assume nothing is happening. God is working, even beneath the surface. And perseverance means continuing to trust Him, one step at a time. Over the past few weeks, we've been talking about perseverance. We talked about how we need to keep walking even when things feel uncertain. We talked about trusting in the waiting when God's timing isn't clear. We talked about standing when we feel weary and allowing God to renew our strength. And today we talked about trusting the slow. Believe God is working beneath the surface, even when we don't see it. Because this is what I've learned. Perseverance isn't just one moment. It's a journey. It's continuing to walk, continuing to trust, continuing to stand, and continuing to believe even when growth feels slow. And as we do, God is forming something in us, something steady, something rooted, something strong. And sometimes we won't see that growth right away. But over time, we will begin to see what God has been building all along. If you're in a slow season right now, take a moment today to thank God for the work He is doing, even if you can't see it yet. Ask Him to help you trust the process and continue walking one step at a time, because perseverance isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's simply continuing to trust God in the slow. Thank you for joining me today. And remember, you can always choose today.